Welcome back after lunch to the second part of corporations. Next up on the list is our Telecom Act. As I think you all remember from our last meeting, our Telecom Act sunsets here next year, and so we're looking at what to do, what services to provide, if we still need a regulated environment, all those exciting questions. I don't know, Josh, are you walking us through the bill draft before us? At our last meeting, we did ask for some amendments. It's my understanding some of them were well received and some of them, perhaps not for various parts of the industry. But Mr. Anderson, if you'd walk us through the draft, that would be great.
Sure thing, Mr. Chairman. Josh Anderson, LSO. At the Hewlett meeting, I believe it was the Wyoming Telecom Association provided a list of proposed changes to the Telecommunications Act. And that was the direction of the committee, was to draft a bill to implement those. So this was the effort to try to accomplish that with, I guess, a caveat that, it was not necessarily provided in statutory language, but just kind of a list of ideas. So this is my best interpretation of what I thought those were. And then also the direction of the committee was to extend the sunset date to 2025. So that's the first change there on page 2. Another large change of the approach that this would take is to, instead of a list of ideas that are not regulated, this would kind of change that structure of the act to things that are regulated. So you'll see there's a definition of what a regulated telecommunication service is.
Page 3, is that appropriate at this time?
Sure, you can go ahead and ask.
Mr. Chairman, on page 3, you've got the provisions that the title, the whole title applies only to regulated telecommunication services. Does that mean that only regulated services can get the Universal Service Fund? And if so, Mr. Chairman, what are the implications of that? And specifically, what percentage of the local telecommunication services are regulated?
Mr. Anderson, if you know, I'm sure there's several industry people behind
Yes,
you.
Mr. Chairman, the first part of that I believe is true, that it would only be regulated telecommunication services that would participate in that Universal Service Fund. As to the second part of that question, I might have to defer to others in the room.
Good enough for now. Okay, keep going to the bill.
Yes, sir. So then as you see on page 3 there, as Senator Scott noted, then this bill changes, again, the structure from what is with a list of things that are not included to saying that it only applies to regulated telecom services, which are defined. Bottom of page 3 and over to page 4, these are dealing with a certificate of public convenience. Going forward, the telecom services would not be required to obtain a certificate of public convenience, but they would be required to register with the commission. And then there, middle of page 4 specifies that the commission may make a finding that a telecom service is or is not subject to competition for purposes of determining whether that service is a regulated telecommunication service. Over onto page 5, these are mostly conforming changes to just reference the new definition of regulated telecommunication services. And same with page 6, again, mostly conforming changes. That's also page 7. Over onto bottom of page 7 and top of and through page 8, this is also dealing with price increases, and added a provision there that notice of a price increase may be posted, provided by posting the price increase online. Over onto page 9, again, dealing with the powers of the commission, notes that the commission has the power to investigate the methods and practices of any telecommunications company providing regulated telecommunication services, or to determine if a company is providing regulated telecommunication services. Over on to bottom of page 9, top of page 10, again, clarifies that the commission may adopt rules and regulations as necessary to exercise authority expressly delegated under the Federal Communications Act of 1934. Over on to page 11, this deals with the annual report of the commission and says that this report shall primarily include information on regulated telecommunication services, again, with the focus on those services in general. On bottom of page 11 and through page 12, this is dealing with just some conforming amendments, primarily subsection A of that section is being repealed, and so making clear what section is that applies to. Mr. Chairman, on page 13, this is dealing with the Universal Service Fund, again, specifying that it applies to those companies providing regulated telecommunication services. And again, another conforming change on page 14, as well as an extension of the date there from 2023 to 2025 to coincide with the new sunset date. And then on page 15, you can see those sections that are being repealed. And then if there's any questions about what those are included below there for committee discussion. And that's pretty much the bill, Mr. Chairman. I'd take any questions.
Any questions directed at LSO? Not seeing any. Senator Scott, go ahead.
Chairman, the business of the telecommunications report just covering the regulated, why was that done?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that was one of the requests and the proposals that was provided, just to have the overall focus of the act be on those regulated services and not on telecommunication services in general.
I would ask, as witnesses comment on that, because I think we still have a need to understand the system as a whole. And Mr. Chairman, my fear is that we are on the verge of losing our universal service abilities and having a fragmented society where telecommunication services are not available to a portion of the population. And I think we need to have some focus at the Public Service Commission on issues around that.
And as, several of the industry people come up, they will keep those in mind. Other questions for Mr. Anderson? Off the hot seat.
Thanks, Josh.
So, hey, Public Service Commission, came all the way up to see us. I suppose while you're here, we should probably hear from you next as the entity and unbiased party. Welcome. I'm not sure if you noticed, Mr. Petrie, but all of the industry people sat on one side of the room and you two sat on the other. Not sure why that is, but welcome. Mm-hmm.
I think we came in the room first, so it's their choice.
Yeah, or maybe they're just all closest to the door. If you turn that mic on and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Chairman,
members of the committee. I'm Chris Petrie, Chairman of the Wyoming Public Service Commission, and I'm here today with my colleague, Deputy Chairman Mike Robinson. And I'll start off by disclaiming a particularly strong position with respect to the bill that's been produced as a result of your directive at the last meeting. There are a few things about this bill that I'm not certain I completely understand or anticipate the effect of, and a couple of those I can address specifically. I don't believe that this bill would work a dramatic change in what the Public Service Commission is doing. Maybe somewhat more artfully crafted than what we've got now, which is an accumulation of amendments that have occurred over the years. And I have definitely heard a few folks, including the new lawyers or even the experienced lawyers at the Public Service Commission, comment on the difficulty of organizing the act in your mind as it is written. So this does simplify things, and it takes a different approach, as you've already heard, in describing what is to be done rather than starting with the universe and ruling things out and making a lot of exceptions. The two aspects of this that I would specifically call your attention to are in 3715-201, the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity matter. If there's not to be a sunset and this bill or some other version emerges, I'd ask you to consider whether removing the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity requirement is the best answer. And the reason I say that is that we have understood ourselves to be serving as something of a gatekeeper there. These applications for a certificate are not particularly difficult. It's not a particularly difficult hurdle for the companies to meet. And I don't know that the commission has ever rejected an application. We have over the years required more information from an applicant, and we have perhaps had some questions for them. I don't think that anybody has been rejected. What we don't know is how many potential telecom actors have been deterred from beginning operations in the state by that hurdle. And given that it's a low hurdle, you have to wonder, or I have to wonder, whether we may have deterred operators who we really don't need in Wyoming, that may actually be more of an affliction on the citizenry than a provider of service. And so since that is not a terribly big burden or a terribly big burden on the commission, and it may have an effect of deterring telecom operators that we just assume, or that probably wouldn't provide a great benefit to the state, I would ask you to take a look at that. And
Or don't make sense, go ahead.
May I ask where in the bill this is found?
Senator
find that
Scott,
section, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, it's a deletion at 3715-201. Towards the end of that, it's on page 4, lines 3 through 4, where obtain a certificate of public convenience and necessity is deleted and register with is inserted.
Thank you.
On a fairly similar point, onto the staff notes and the deleted provisions on 3715-301. On page 19 and the bottom of page 19, top of page 20, that deletion eliminates the registration of inter-exchange companies. And that is also not a terribly burdensome thing for companies providing inter-exchange service in the state to do. It's a form consisting of a page or two that is helpful in a couple of situations. One is we kind of need to know who we're dealing with when it comes to assessments for the Wyoming Universal Service Fund. And so whoever is in this industry in the state, if we have no idea who they are, then it becomes difficult to perform that function. And then it also, it can also be a bit of a problem in the case of any service interruptions. I'm thinking back to the onset of the COVID pandemic, and there were some telecommunications issues where it was rather challenging to figure out who all was involved in the provision of a service. And so the registration form is what gives us contact information for their regulatory personnel and complaint personnel and so on, so that we can actually get a hold of them in the event that we have some need to do so. So, as I said, Mr. Chairman, this would not work a dramatic change to what the Public Service Commission is currently doing. We may find that there would be some additional fine tuning to do. There's interplay between definitions and so forth. So I wouldn't represent that I've imagined every problem that might come up here, and it's also possible we'd engage in a rulemaking because of this. But we do rulemaking all the time. I'm sure that we could get that done if we needed to. And we look forward to your direction, whether this bill proceeds or not, and whether the sunset occurs. I'd also just say that we have accounted for the sunset in our budget preparation process, so we are prepared in the case of any of the potential outcomes that we've imagined so far.
Senator Scott, question?
Chairman, yeah, I've got several questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, go ahead.
One, on the change in the Universal Service Fund to where it's only going to be available for those that are regulated. Is that going to cut down significantly the amount of people that can get the Universal Service Fund? What percentage of the total telecommunications market is regulated these days?
Mr. Petrie, if you know.
Senator Scott, Mr. Chairman, the second part of the question, what percentage of the telecommunications market is regulated these days? That's a pretty tough one. I mean, we can provide the numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head about how many essential service customers the regulated companies have. As I'm reading this, I don't believe that this would change the scope of Wyoming Universal Service Fund, because these companies that would be regulated under this bill, I believe, are the same companies that are currently providers of non-competitive essential services. And I'll, brace myself for future corrections this afternoon, but that's my understanding here.
I don't have any feel for is that a handful of people? How different is that from what you're doing right now with the Universal Service Fund?
Go ahead.
Senator Scott, Mr. Chairman, I don't think that it would be very different. We're currently with the Wyoming Universal Service Fund. I believe that the number for this year, the projection or the calculation says $2.1 million in support. I think that it's about 26,000 or 29,000 customers, and I think that it's about $80 annually per. Now, I might have that all wrong, but if that math adds up, I think that's about where it comes out. I think it's in the high 20,000s range of supported lines.
Mr. Chairman, on the same line, does what we do with our universal service fund have any effect on the federal fund? Is that independent?
Yep.
Senator Scott, Mr. Chairman. It's independent. The federal high-cost broadband and other support and funding mechanisms operate without any regard to the Wyoming fund. The way the interplay is that the commission takes account of federal support so that there's not a duplication.
Oh, you have free reign, Senator Scott.
Okay, so my constituents that are in the rural areas that are using landline services will not see a dramatic, and they're not price regulated now. They will not see a dramatic increase in their phone bills because of the passage of this. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. And
I'll have some other
Fair enough.
questions.
let me clarify, Senator Scott, Mr. Chairman, that's, I don't mean to say that they won't see an increase in their phone bill somehow, but not because of this.
I understand that.
Senator Case? Okay.
Senator Scott, I don't think they're going to see an increase dramatic whether we pass this bill or not, or don't have a bill at all.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and let me give you a little background. I had an experience this summer, and where I live, it's been deregulated, but we don't have reliable cell phone coverage. It's out a significant part of the time, and given it's usable, but given to dropping longer calls on quite a scale. I had experience where the landline service was out for 5 days and the company was just unapproachable. They had a phone tree you couldn't get through most of the time. And they just weren't doing anything about it. And I had to call the Public Service Commission, and they did called somebody and it did get fixed. It was some kind of central office problem, I think. But they were just, you couldn't get at them. And the impression I got, Mr. Chairman, was they simply didn't care. And then I had another experience where my cell phone carrier, which was a major carrier, went out for a day and a half, totally. And I couldn't find anybody to call. And that one resolved itself. The company realized they had a problem and fixed it. But that's background, Mr. Chairman. The question is, if this bill passes, will the Public Service Commission have any authority over quality of service issues and companies where there is not a price regulation?
Mr. Petrie, in its current form, I believe
Mr.
you still have
Chairman.
some oversight, but go ahead.
Senator Scott, I was trying to sneak a peek at the provision here that deals with the potential for the commission to grab hold of a company that was previously determined competitive or had never been regulated and assert authority over them. And I think that this might, there might be an ambiguity in the language here, or it might eliminate that potential. We, as you noted, Senator Scott, are not currently regulating your landline provider. And so we have a pretty limited actual authority over that service quality. What we often end up doing is trying to facilitate a customer service and restoration function. And we generally get some cooperation on that point. We don't really have a big immediately available stick that can be used in those situations to require specific action by a landline company that is not a provider of essential non-competitive or non-competitive essential services right now. So there may be some effect from the alteration of at least the threat that future return to regulation is possible. That could have some impact on any any competitive carriers' behavior, but I have no real way to know how far that goes.
What I was afraid of was that the provision on page 3, lines 6 through 8 would eliminate any ability for the PSC to really deal with quality of service problems in companies where they weren't regulating the prices. And Mr. Chairman, I will say, if that's the case, I'm quite concerned about it.
Senator Scott, I
go
think
ahead.
that, Mr. Chairman, I think that may eliminate something of an ambiguity about the commission's authority over non-competitive, or excuse me, competitive service providers, such as you get your landline service from, Senator Scott. So I don't think it's a black and white elimination of any power that the commission clearly has now, but there may be a potential for the exercise of commission power that would not exist after this, if this bill was enacted.
Okay. Another one?
There, Mr. Chairman, in the repealed sections, and the LSOs included these, looking at particularly the provision that is on page 20, lines 11 through 45, it's entitled Protections of Telecommunications Customers. Should we, what I'm wondering, Mr. Chairman, and I don't know whether Mr. Petrie is the right one to ask or some of the other witnesses the right one to ask, but do we need to retain that provision and make sure that applies? And Mr. Chairman, I have seen some problems with landline customers, in particular in the urban areas, as well as my rural area. And I think that there may be some need for basic consumer protections. I'll leave it without any thoughts on that particular section.
Senator Scott, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
That's probably worth some discussion. I'm not sure that it's clear now that the commission has a unquestioned ability to apply quality of service standards in a manner that involves the commission having any teeth to a company that has been found competitive or that is providing service other than non-competitive essential service. So potentially worth some discussion if that's the
Mr. Chairman,
direction.
one final question here. On the next page, page 21, 37-4-412, unauthorized change in telecommunications company. That was quite a problem. Maybe 20 years ago, there was a fair amount of that sort of thing going on, Mr. Chairman. This section totally put a stop to that. Should we retain, my question is, should we retain section 412 just as a basic consumer protection that we ought to have in case that particular evil practice rears its head again once it's not prohibited.
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, Senator Scott, it has been a long time since there was a plague of slamming. So this is basically what was called the slamming and cramming statute. So slamming, when they change your provider without your permission or request, and cramming, when things end up on your phone bill through arrangements between a phone company and some third party, or charges are placed on the bill by the phone company that you don't know anything about. And so I'm not certain that those practices are extinct throughout the world, or that somebody won't reinvigorate that business model, so to speak, in the future. And so it's, it would, I suppose, come with some kind of a risk to eliminate that provision. It's banning a couple of practices that clearly nobody wants.
Okay. Any other questions for the PSC while I have them up here? Seeing none. Thank you much, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jason, do you have, I know you're all back there. I don't know if anybody decided who wants to go first or last, or since Jason's sitting closest to the front, I guess we'll call him up first. Welcome, Mr. Hendricks.
They're all back there with that one chair between everybody.
COVID protocol. Go ahead, Jason.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jason Hendricks with Range. We're a provider of service in a number of areas of the state. I'm speaking on behalf of the Wyoming Telecom Association today, of which we're a member. First of all, I'd like to thank LSO for the draft. When I presented this concept in June, as was noted, this was just a list of concepts. And so to take that and to put it into this draft, I think it was done very well and incorporated a lot of the concepts. And we do have some suggested tweaks if we get to that point for that, some amendments that I think that you all have in front of you. But I think that it mostly captured what we were trying to achieve. And so just a real quick reminder of what I talked about in June. Our position on this is that as much progress as we've made in the state on competition, there are still areas of the state where landline service is the only service that's available. There are no competitive alternatives. And with that in mind, knowing that we're continuing to evolve and federal money might be coming down to perhaps fix a lot of those problems, in the meantime, we are in a situation where there isn't competition to regulate the market, and therefore having some kind of regulation may still make sense in some areas at least. So with that as a background, I think that I'd like to answer some of the questions, if that's okay, and go through some of the stuff that was just talked about that Senator Scott was raising. I guess first of all, on page 3, on the question of whether or not that language on lines 6 through 8, applying only to regulated services, if that would change things for universal service, I don't think it would. And the reason why I say that is that the definition that's on page 2 of regulated telecommunication service, that it has non-competitive local exchange service. Now, setting aside the broadband, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but that portion of it on non-competitive local exchange service is essentially what is regulated today, price-wise, and what the universal service mechanism supports. And so our intention with the proposal and my reading of this language is that it would not change things as far as who receives money and how they receive money. And actually, I do, if we get to a point where we're talking about amendments, I would like to, to actually make it completely consistent, having the word essential after non-competitive actually really makes it consistent with the current USF language. But if you look through the act on what's been taken out, In some instances, it says non-competitive, in some instances, it says non-competitive essential. But from a practical perspective, it's always non-competitive essential, which is your basic local exchange service. On the report on page, let's see, page 11, I believe it was, the report to the legislature, primarily focused on regulated services. Yeah, that was consistent with our intent of the changes to be focused on what is regulated rather than this full gamut of stuff that's not regulated. And so simplifying and focusing the act. And then this is just a follow through on that the report would be focused on that. Now, it does say primarily. So if there are proposals to look at other things, I think those could be included, but that was the intent there. And again, we're talking about the regulated services that are supported by USF. I'm going to skip back again on page 3 on that regulated telecommunication service, the title only applying to this. One thing for consideration on that is how that works for contributions, because contributions to the USF are assessed on things besides just regulated service. So this is that's a legal analysis on how that would work. That may be a concern from the contribution perspective, but not on the distribution recovery perspective. And I think that there's two other issues. So quality of service was raised. There are sections in this bill that don't get into, that don't have changes to or repeals of certain sections of the current act. And one of those is section 15406, which is quality of service. And so my understanding of this bill is that it would not affect review of quality of service because it's not touching that section. 406. And similarly, on the going back and having the commission go back and re-regulating companies that are currently deregulated, I don't believe that this bill touches that section of the act either. And so to the extent that that's a concern for the committee on having the commission still have that authority, I don't think that this bill affects that.
Mr. Chairman, on this point, with the language on page 3, lines 6 through 8, that the provision of this title shall apply only to regulated telecommunications services, why does that not knock out 15406 provisions for anybody that's not regulated as to price?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Senator Scott, so right now for those areas where the regulation has gone away, the commission does not have oversight on quality of service or price. And so to the extent that the commission looked at it and said, well, those areas, it turns out, aren't competitive, or things have changed in the market and we thought there was competition, now there's not, and therefore we want to invoke this provision that allows us to go back and regulate them, that would then make them a regulated service, and then the quality of service and price control would kick in at that point. And then just the last thing that was talked about on the slamming and cramming, when we talked about that in our discussion draft that this draft is based on, the one thing that we pointed out is there are federal rules on slamming and cramming. There's FCC rules on that. And the one question that we had was, do those rules apply to intrastate services? So if the state were to eliminate that section of the statute, do the FCC rules take over at that point? And if not, then maybe the commission wants to, or the state still wants to have that as a provision in the statute. And so if that were to go back in, our position would be that we're fine with it. I mean, we comply with the slamming and cramming rules anyways. We comply with the FCC rules. If it needs to have a state component for a certain subset of services, then that's fine. Or if a legal analysis says the FCC rules are good enough, that's fine too. So on the issue of the CPCN, similarly, we identified that as an issue of if the commission uses that for certain purposes and wants to retain that, we're fine with retaining that. And then on the IXC regulation, that's a very good point on the assessment part. If you need to know who the inter-exchange carriers are in order to allow for contributions into the USF, then maybe you'd want to retain that as well, in addition to the other purposes the commission wants those for. So we'd be okay with both of those as well. I understand that there are folks who would like to just simply extend the act for a couple years because there are a lot of changes that are happening on the federal side that may fix some of these problems. It's the big problem being that there's not a lot of money in certain areas. There's not a lot of competition in certain areas. So if federal funding comes in for broadband in areas that don't have broadband, and then that allows for voice services over top of it, then maybe that it reduces the need for regulation and USF. To the extent that that happens, that's something that the commission and the legislature would want to review. We are fine with having a 2-year extension, allowing things to play out on the federal side, reviewing that at that time. So we would be okay with that proposal. If the committee would like to have providers get together and come up with a draft, a set of changes that we can all agree to the fullest extent possible for the October meeting, we're also okay with that position. But if you want to work on amendments today to this bill draft, I have provided copies of those. You should have them electronically and in paper format. And I would be glad to go through those now if you would like to.
How about let's hear from everyone, and then if we want to go through amendments, we'll do it at that time. Is that okay? On the off chance that enough people keep texting me about what we might be doing, we'll see. But if we're going to get into amendment stuff, I think then we'll call you back up and go through them all. That works. And give everybody another opportunity. Okay. Other questions, Mr. Hendricks? Seeing none right now.
Thank
Don't
you.
go too far. Any other public comment? Ms. Levin?
Starting to feel like a game of chicken back there, Mr. Chairman, on who's going to go next.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the front. Happy to see you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Jody Levin. I'm here on behalf of Charter and Verizon. At the outset, I'll say this. I've been through a lot of telecom rewrites over the years. Many of those used to take multiple interims to work through. Certainly not just a couple of meetings, and that's because definitions in the telecom world mean everything. We are all regulated differently, and so what seemingly on paper looks like a small tweak has implications kind of throughout the industry. So outside of a extension, I would say there is no simple tweak to this act. My clients prefer an extension from 2023 to 2025 for the exact reasons that Mr. Hendricks just indicated, in that there are changes coming federally that have the real implications for the industry that will also then probably necessitate changes to Wyoming's act. My clients believe that Wyoming's act is actually very good. It's one of the best acts that they deal with in the nation. And that's because it provides regulatory clarity and operational certainty for the services that they provide. So they would like you to continue Wyoming's act. That's not to say that it doesn't need to be modified or that there aren't provisions that need to be addressed. But the idea that you would sunset this act in its entirety, my clients definitely do not support that concept and would ask you to always kind of keep those provisions in mind. Mr. Chairman, I know my colleagues have amendments and they have sent them to you. I have amendments as well, if that's the direction of the committee. I did not send them to you because I don't think that that does the process justice. As I indicated, these debates usually are robust. We sit down, we talk. In past years, it's been sometimes more knockdown, drag-out discussions, really long committee hearings. I remember one that both Senator Scott and Senator Case were at that took 14 hours only on telecom because, again, definitions mean everything in this industry. So my colleagues have seen the amendments. Certainly the PSC has not seen those amendments. You have not seen those amendments because we all need to sit down and talk. We need to talk through these changes and we need to understand what these implications do to the various sectors of the industry. At the outset, I will say the definition of a regulated service when it includes broadband, that is of tremendous concern to my clients. We believe that goes the wrong direction from where Wyoming has gone in the past, in that Wyoming has been largely a deregulated state, and now you're bringing in broadband as a regulated service. That's of concern. The other provisions, the definition, if you can get the definition right, many of the other changes proposed probably aren't that problematic. The repealers are problematic. There are several sections that industry has fought very hard to bring in over the years. One of those is 3715-105. This is voice over internet protocol and IP-enabled services. Industry fought very hard to bring this in because there were some outstanding questions on whether that should be regulated or if it was regulated. Industry took a very hard stand to ensure that that was not a regulated service. This repeals that in the notion that you would only have certain regulated services, but that creates ambiguity. That addresses that operational security and clarity that is so important to my clients. So we'd want to bring that back in. The other sections are largely in Section 404, and that is the protection of consumers. In some cases, my clients are consumers, and that's through wholesale services. And it's important to retain those provisions in this act so that, again, we have that operational understanding if a dispute arises that you can go to the Public Service Commission to address it. So, Mr. Chairman, again, I would hope that the committee would look at a 2-year extension, allow us to get through these changes federally or whatever is going to happen federally. I think all of you can understand the difficulty. Treasury rules keep changing. You saw that with CARES Act. You saw that with ARPA funding. It's happening on the broadband side as well. So there's a real chance we'd have to come back in and address these provisions in a couple of years anyway.
Senator Scott.
If I may interrupt, the second one that you wanted to retain, I didn't catch that. Which provision is it where?
So, Mr. Chairman, in the repealers section specifically, on page 15, line 7, it would be 3715-105, 3715-404, subsection D, subsection E, Romanet 1, and on line 8, the words through, and then Romanet 6. Those are the sections that are being repealed that we would ask that be put back into the act. Similar to Mr. Hendricks, Mr. Chairman, if it is the will of this committee that you want industry to get together and work through amendments, we'll certainly do that. That's been the position of my clients throughout the years. We do sit down, we try to work these out. Many times we get there, sometimes we don't, and that becomes then the policy decision for the legislature. But this specific draft, Mr. Chairman, and the proposed changes, my clients believe are highly problematic.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Chairman, appreciate that. I would add the comment that I had in my list and repealers we didn't want to do, the 3715, 404D and the E provisions as well.
Just one quick question. You kept saying clients. I want to make, are you, just one more time, who you're representing, and maybe there's more than one I'm not aware of.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Chairman, I thought I covered that when I introduced myself. If I didn't, I apologize. It is Charter and Verizon. The amendments I have today are from Charter Communications specifically. Verizon holds those same views, but those amendments would be coming from Charter.
Senator Case, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, it'd be really interesting if we had video of all the telecom things from the beginning, and we had people, just snippets of people introducing themselves and who they represent, and it would just go on and on and on. We'd have Ms. Lee being with the PSE, and we'd have Jody being with Quest, and we'd have changes out there, and we'd have changes over here. And it would just, that'd be a fascinating journey, I think.
For those of you not completely familiar with Senator Case, the telecom world is very small, and many of the current government affairs people formerly represented other entities, and now they've all switched over the past 15 years. So those of us who've been here for a long time, we know all the same people, but they all had different roles.
Some of them, their companies changed names,
Yeah.
and some of them changed companies, and
We've all stayed the same up here, but yeah.
some lobbyists took the chairs of other lobbyists. It's just pretty crazy.
It's an exciting, regulated world.
It just means some of us have been at this probably too long, Mr. Chairman.
And
On this side, of course, not on that side.
anytime you want to come to this side. So let me ask a question, opinion-wise. Would it be advisable then if this committee just went back to extending the act 2 years, but left it open? And if there was possibility for you all to get together and have, I don't even want to call it negotiate, but a better working group conversation on what might be achievable and bring it back to the October meeting? Do you think, I guess my question overall is, do you think there is room for agreement on some amendments? Or is probably not the year and then maybe just 2 years? I'm trying to kind of fill in the edges of where we're going, and I'm not sure if any of us want 3 hours. Those of you who haven't spent 14 hours dealing with wording, it is exciting, but maybe not on a Friday at 2 o'clock. So thoughts on where you think we can realistically go, in your opinion? Scott?
Mr. Chairman, so like, to ask on the 2 years, do you think the feds are going to get their act together within 2 years, or do we need to make it 4 years to allow for them being slow?
So,
Good luck.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Scott, I would say my clients are more than willing to sit at a table and try to work through these changes. Do I think we can get there on some provisions? I do. Do I think we can get there on everything? I do not. That is just the nature of this industry. I mean, sometimes we can all agree, but we're regulated differently, and then that just leads to differences of opinion. So just to be frank about it, some things we can get there on, some things we won't. Do I believe that the feds will get this figured out in 2 years? I do not. My clients would advocate for a longer extension, but in fairness to some of my industry colleagues, I know that's problematic for them. So I felt that 2 years is probably as good of a compromise as we're going to get for now.
Okay. Don't go too far in case we're going to go for another round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Anyone else in the back of the room at this time? Or I can ask him, Mr. Agopian.
You know, we could just stay the weekend and get this done.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we lock Senator Case in with a bunch of these lobbyists. Make them work it out.
You know, in the right location, it could be good. Welcome, Mr. Agopian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nick Agopian. I represent Visionary Broadband. For those of you that don't know, Visionary is an internet service provider and falls under, based in Gillette, and currently falls under the act for the VoIP, the voice over IP services that they provide. I think Ms. Levin identified all the issues that we've identified in its current form. Visionary does not support the current draft. We don't support the information. We don't support, I think it was the white paper that was provided. That was the genesis for the draft that's in front of us. And we don't support that the proponents' proposed amendments that have been shared with this committee and industry peers. We've identified the same issues that Ms. Levin identified, the same ones that Senator Scott identified. And in the interest of saving some time, I'd probably just stand for questions and identify our support for a two-year extension.
You have questions, Senator Scott? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, by just 2 year extension, do you mean a simple bill that simply says that moves the sunset date forward 2 years?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, yes, that would just move it forward 2 years. And not, at this point, we would not push for any substantive amendments to the act.
How would you feel about moving it forward 4 years?
I believe I would, Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I would have to leave the door open to confirm with my client or leave that door open to come back and correct the answer I give you. I think we would be okay with that. But like Ms. Levin identified, we're aware that a 4-year extension may be problematic for some of our peers. That's where we're thinking about too.
Okay, questions? Seeing none yet.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to come forward? Welcome, Mr. Pickard. Welcome to corporations.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dave Pickard. I represent Lumen, and Lumen and formerly known as CenturyLink. So I too have been involved in the telecom rewrites. I think it was my 19th year representing a telecom company of some sort, whether it be an unregulated wireless company, IP-enabled type company, or a rate-regulated or long-distance company. But we have a little bit different view on the sunset in this bill. We do agree with a lot of the aspects of the bill that's in front of you. We share the same concern with many about the broadband definition being included in there. I think that's premature and probably not what the committee or the PSC would like to venture forward with. We do have an amendment that it might have been circulated. If we do work this the rest of the afternoon, I'd certainly like to propose that amendment. It simply says that that you can opt out from the Universal Service Fund by receiving any funds from it. It would not mean that your customers and subscribers would not be obligated to pay into the fund. That would continue. And we just feel that if you're not going to take money from the fund, then you shouldn't be regulated. Having said that, and the concerns that were brought up, especially by Ms. Levin and others, we would prefer to have a 1-year sunset. And let me walk you through why that is. As we looked at the sunset being extended in 2015, we pushed it out 4 years, talking about the uncertainty at the federal level and the uncertainty of new entrants and new technologies coming into the state of Wyoming. So in 2019, a 4-year span period, instead of sitting down and working on the tough issues before the legislature and public policy and telecom, we simply extended the date 2 years to 2023. We'd also be happy with the act completely sunsetting. And I don't think that there's any appetite for that among the legislature as a whole, as a majority. But extending it 1 year keeps everybody's feet to the fire, keeps the industry feet to the fire. It keeps the policymakers, because if we go down this road of always punting and kicking the can several more years because of uncertainty, there's never been certainty. Since 1982, when the decree on divestiture for AT&T was created, we have not had certainty from the federal government in this policy realm. So we would not be actively opposing a 2-year extension, but we would actually prefer a 1 year rather than 2. And again, for the same reasons, we would oppose having a 4-year extension, because all we're doing is continuing to hold back bringing up to date our regulatory statutes in this industry. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd try and answer any questions.
Questions? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, more a response. Mr. Chairman, these telecommunication acts can be complicated and controversial. And leaving aside the 2/3 introduction requirement at a budget session, which could cause mischief, I would be concerned of a Telecommunications Act in the budget session at this point, that we'd simply run out of time on key features. And so, Mr. Chairman, I urge on you that the 2 years is a minimum extension.
Okay. Further comments, questions for Lumen? Not seeing it this time, Dave.
All right,
Thank you for being.
thank you.
3 left. Anyone? Not right now? So committee, I'll close public comment with the understanding that we might be reopening depending on where this committee wants to go. So the question is, who wants to throw out the first motion? Senator Scott looks like he wants it. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, there's something I want.
Oh. Representative Duncan, any questions for the audience before I let Senator Scott make a motion? Okay. Go ahead then, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not quite prepared to make a motion. Mr. Chairman, the comment I would make is that I do think we need to redo this. I think we need to carry it over to next time. Whether you do that with a motion or not, I don't particularly care. I would serve notice that if we do that, I had a motion amendment ready that isn't going to work. Given what we've heard, some of the things today, I need to redo it. My concern is that we need to leave the Public Service Commission with a little more regulatory authority in the quality of service area, because I am frankly concerned that some of the big companies we've got don't give a damn about certain of the rural areas where population is relatively sparse, and we are likely to lose our universal service characteristics if we don't put in a little more regulation on the quality of service. That some of those companies have been noticeably difficult to deal with. And Mr. Chairman, we've tried a number of solutions out there, and it's simply something, we haven't found anything that really works as an alternative to certain of the carriers. So, Mr. Chairman, I have that concern. I have concern that the way this bill is drafted, that applying the provisions of the title only to the regulated ones gets us in considerable trouble. And I would hope any redo would deal in that. With that, when we're ready and other members have had a chance to make a comment or two, I'd be happy to move to lay the bill back to the next meeting.
Okay. You want to go to Senator Case, then we'll go to Representative Duncan?
I think she was first, but I do have a motion that I think would get us off the dime. And I'll just throw it out in concept. The motion is that we adopt as our working draft an extension of the sunset for 2 years with the existing law. And that we just put that out there as our working bill for next time. And we encourage industry with the PSC and others to get together and to present us with a industry position if you can, or 2 alternative industry positions at our next meeting to adopt in lieu of the working draft with a 2-year extension.
Is there a second? Second by Bonner. Discussion on that amendment committee. Well, I guess on that motion. Representative Duncan, thoughts? Your hand's still up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is the motion for just a draft to extend the current sunset date for 2 years?
I believe part of it would be to take out the changed language that we saw in this meeting and go back to the existing act in statute and move the repeal date back 2 years. That correct, Senator Case?
Precisely, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Duncan, it would just be our new framework for going forward is a 2-year extension of the sunset, but we're not going to vote on that until the next meeting, and we vote on it if people bring amendments.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll let industry have till that time to bring us with a kumbaya proposal or more than one. I understand there might be two camps, but we ought to be able to narrow it down to two. They're pretty close. Honestly, they'll be able to do this.
Further discussion on that motion?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott, go ahead. Mike.
Mr. Chairman, I think the motion is a good one. I can vote for. If we do that, I will have an amendment prepared that I think can be fitted into anything
Okay.
in the quality of service area, where I do have some major concerns with the existing situation. Now, that wouldn't necessarily fit in one that was just an extension of the date.
If that's fair enough, it could even be a standalone something or other.
True. Representative Duncan, another comment? Just wasn't sure if that hand was supposed to go down or not. It's down. Okay, further comments, committee? All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Okay, that motion's passed. We'll put it on the agenda for October with that sunset date and another iteration, and certainly would encourage that gaggle back there to, if there are some common ground or close to common ground, and if there is some real push that we need some immediate amendments before, let's say, 2 years, to at least have kind of a clear division of, you know, what the question before the legislature is, and if you'd like us to help solve it, I'm sure several of us would be excited to do so. With that, any other public comment? Let's start in general with telecommunications. Anything else in the PSC? Everything else in your world is going most excellent? On your way to Gillette after this?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, yep, Representative Duncan, go ahead. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just some quick clarifications. It's hard to follow on Zoom with compared to the room. So the bill draft that was in front of us, that's just laid to the side?
Correct. It'll go, the bill, well, technically the bill draft got amended to go back to the original language
Okay.
with a 2-year extension.
Okay, that's what I just was trying to make sure.
Any other general public comment about anything? I know we do have our pharmacy industry pharmacist here who sat through our meeting and is anxiously awaiting PBMs in October. But I do know there's a working group headed up by the Department of Insurance, and some of us will be attending their next meeting in September. So look forward to our PBM work in our October meeting.
I have one more thing.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to briefly talk about how we finish off our next meeting and the wind taxation issue that came to this committee. As you recall, right now it stands that the county assessors are going to be taxing wind facilities. And in our last meeting, we proposed to take a look at moving that back to the state. I want to point out to you that the bill draft and any dates, that's a really problematic thing to accomplish that this year. And I don't think you can. I don't think there's any way we can. And Josh may want to comment on this. So what it means in practice is that the counties are going to have a chance at doing it this year, and we could take it away from them again next year. But there is no practical way legally to take it away from the counties right now. And I'm just trying to be clear with everybody, because the counties have already engaged consultants, and all of them have engaged the same consultant as I understand it. So that is proceeding. I think you'll be pleased with the results. And Josh, you might comment on the dates and what the committee can do retroactively or not, if you wouldn't mind. Go ahead, Josh. And the only reason I'm bringing up, it overlaps with revenue, Josh staff's revenue. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Josh Anderson also. So yeah, the way that we generally draft bills that affect property taxes is that they're effective January 1 of the year following that session that they're introduced, just because that property tax year starts on January 1. If there was an interest in trying to move that date up, we'd certainly be willing to look into that issue, but I think there would be some potential issues with that just because of that tax year start date on January 1 with the date of our session happening after that time.
Mr. Chairman, on that topic, I have engaged with, I know certainly our Commerce County assessor is usually at these meetings. I've been engaged with her as well as the wind industry to see if we can find some sort of middle ground on that issue. So I did talk to Chairman Driscoll about and just thought I'd give the committee an update there since it does certainly deal with Commerce County, maybe a little bit more than the average county. And we're pursuing some sort of middle ground with that as well. So had a few ideas that I don't think have much traction, to include having some sort of oversight over every industry, not just wind or portion of wind that is assessed by the state. I don't think that'd certainly generate more opposition than it would support. But I think it is important to take a holistic view at these issues, and we'll see what we can do for our next meeting, see if there's possibly some middle ground that could be found.
Any other comments come before the committee? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, while we've still got some of the telecommunications lobbyists here, I'd like to serve notice that what I'm interested in is giving the Public Service Commission a little clearer authority to take consumer complaints on service issues and try to resolve them with the telecom providers right across the spectrum of all the ones that are providing the essential voice services, and want to do something fairly mild, but get something where they have some clear authority and responsibility to take a consumer complaint and get it resolved. That's what I have in mind.
One more, Senator Case.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just to comment on that, I think there's always room in our future for the Public Service Commission to be kind of an ombudsman in this area, if that's, but we're going to have a hard time giving them teeth, especially with the federal law and with the way things have gone in competitive directions. So we can think about that.
All right. Anything else come before the committee today? Our next meeting will be in October. I don't believe we have officially chosen a location yet. So is it October 13th? Katie and Josh, if we could pull that up real fast. As we're looking that up.
Mr. Chairman, currently, it's scheduled for October 13th and 14th.
And still a location to be determined. So I'll meet with the co-chair if anybody wants to welcome us to their communities. Certainly happy to try to get down to Southwest Wyoming again.
Don't we usually, we always in revenue have the third meeting in Cheyenne. And so that was always I thought that was what corporations did.
That was what we used to do in your co-chair.
Yeah.
So it may be in Cheyenne.
Mr. Chairman, I would urge the co-chairman to resolve that promptly.
Quickly.
I've got some family obligations I can maneuver, but those
Closer to Casper, the better.
knowing where it's going to be would be a help.
All right, with that, and seeing no further business to come before the committee, we will stand adjourned and see you all October 13th. Have a safe drive home, everyone. The road should be good.